Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 2021 edition of the Garden State Java User Group meeting. We are excited to have Scott Selikoff make a presentation on the Java certification exam. But before we introduce Scott, I would like to, I need to share my screen. That would help, wouldn't it? Just do a couple of slides on what's going on. Oh, disable screen sharing.
I'm making
Technical difficulties here. We're okay. I'm the host now. So, all right. Share. Okay. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, I don't want that either. All right, there we go. Okay. So yes, again, welcome to this month's meeting. And our agenda for tonight, first, I'd like to thank our sponsors who have been generous in their donations for helping us run our group. And we'll mention them by name. We'll talk about a couple items that are new, and then we'll introduce Scott Selikoff, and we'll have our IntelliJ idea giveaway this month. So first, our platinum sponsor is JFrog, and they really help us out with a number of things. They advise us on how we're doing, things like that. So it's a joy to have them with us. And we are partnered with DevNexus. That is the annual conference that's usually held in Atlanta in the February timeframe. Of course, it was virtual this year, and if you attended this year's virtual event, you will have noticed that this was just outstanding the way they ran this conference this year from a virtual standpoint. We have per meeting sponsors as well, and JetBrains, of course, they provide the IntelliJ IDEA licenses that we raffle off, and Jakarta EE also for we have Crowdcast available to do our meetings as well. We decided to try out Zoom or being streamed to YouTube. So if any of you have a preference, assuming you've been to both of them, please let us know. So what's new? So finally, our gsjug.org domain, which was available from the beginning, it was redirected to the old JavaSig domain. And right now that's all been squared away. It is when you type in gsjug.org, you actually, you'll see the domain in your browser instead of javasig.org. We do have the redirect from javasig.org. So basically it's reverse of what we had in the past. But so please, if you can bookmark the new one, this way you won't have any issues in case we decide to eliminate javasig.org down the road. We'll keep it around at the moment. So we are happy to also be on the Quarkus World Tour, and we're slated for September 14th. I need to follow up and see if a topic has been selected for us, so I can reach out and get some more info on that. And then also FUJE World Tour, if you were around in April. The second meeting in April was the initial FUJE World Tour, and we have a tentative date set at the moment for September 28th. So that's what's coming up. We do have some information about our next meeting, which I can discuss a little later. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and let Scott introduce himself. Scott is, as you may know, he is one of our leaders since, for our, along with us directors, our leadership structure is set that, we have 4 directors, we have 2 leaders, an advisory board. And so Scott is one of our leaders. He helps out in a number of different ways, whether it's advertising, just you name it. It's all behind the scenes stuff. So very happy to have him with us. At this point, I'll stop sharing and we'll send it over to Scott. Scott, you're muted.
Mike, you have to make me the host. to share? Can you hear me, Mike? Just a little technical difficulty, everybody. Oh, there we go. All right. All right, let me share my screen and then I will get started. 1 second. All right, and let me center on the screen. All right, so how's everyone doing tonight? Thank you for attending. I know it's a summer session, so some people have off and whatnot. This presentation is going to be a little bit about certifications, a little bit about Java challenges, and hopefully a little bit of fun. I've posted a link in the window. If Neha or someone else could, add that link over and over again. I'm going to be using polls during this to do some Java challenge questions. They're interactive, so feel free to answer them. It's not recorded or anything. It's just, fun challenge things I thought that might be interesting to do. 1 second, all right. So a little bit about myself. I'm a professional software consultant by trade. I've written a number of books around Java 8 and Java 11 with my co-author, Gene Boyarsky. We have the best-selling Java 8 books, and I think we have the best-selling Java 11 books because there aren't that many for certifications. And I'll be talking about some of those books tonight, or we're not so about the books, but more about how you could use them or how you could study for the cert. And quick poll, I have the poll up now. The first question I have up is, what version of Java are you using at work? If I'm looking to the side, it means I'm setting up the poll. So just kind of a head count of if you have the ability to click on it, go ahead and click on it. And feel free to answer, but it's just to get an idea. The link will stay the same throughout the presentation, so the link isn't going to change. The link will always be that link, and we'll copy into the window a few more times just so everyone has it. I'll put it in again now. Oh, sorry, wrong window. If I'm moving around, it's because I'm managing the poll. But feel free to click it and keep this window open throughout the presentation, because the question, you don't have to reload the page. The questions will automatically change. So far, we'll drag in some of the initial results that we have in so far. So far, we've got a fair mix of Java 11 and Java 12. Surprised no one's said Java 6 or Java 7 yet. That's good. And there'll be a little bit of a delay. So we're streaming off of YouTube. So you guys are getting this about 10, 15 seconds after I say it. So there's a little bit of a delay there. So this is a little bit of an overview of the presentation. I'll try to keep it relatively light. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and my wonderful Java friends will filter the questions to me because I don't have time to read them while I'm talking. So feel free to post whatever you want in the questions. So the first thing I want to start about is the value of being certified. And this isn't necessarily related to Java. This is just being certified in general, whether you're AWS certified, whether you're Google certified, whether you're Scrum certified, whether you're board certified doctor. There's a lot of different motivations about why people get certified. And it's one of the most common questions I get. It's probably the most common question is, why should I get certified, or do certificates matter? The answer is, a lot of people, it's complicated. There's not one reason to get certified. Some people do it to reinforce job skills. Some people do it because their employer requires it. Some people do it because they think it'll make more money or that'll help them get their job, a particular job they're going for. Some to impress your friends. The answer is, it depends. So it may help you on all of those things. It may not help you on any of those things. The one thing I will say, though, is that will increase your education. So it will improve your knowledge. It will, in general, I mean, there could be bad certs out there, but there's been, I think, almost every cert I've ever studied for, I learned something along the way, whether I passed or not. It will improve your knowledge about the subject. It will, in general, give you a broad understanding of a subject that you might only have a narrow view on. And it does look good on paper. It may not help you get a job. You're not going to be able to put a cert on a paper and get it, depending on the cert. You're not going to be able to put most certs on a paper just to automatically get a job, but it doesn't hurt to have the job, the cert on the paper, on your resume. By paper, I mean resume. But I have seen some people who don't like certs. They're few and far between, but in general, it will help. If it's not if learning is not your primary reason, if you really only want to get the cert to make more money, then just consider education to be something a bonus. Consider it to be extra. So you're going for money, or you're going for a job, but you learn something along the way. So it's it's good. So why get Java certified? So that's just a little bit about general certifications. I like to think it exposes you to topics you haven't really seen before. So maybe you've spent a lot of time with streams and IO, but you've never used NIO2, or you've never written your own annotation, or you've kind of brushed against the concurrency classes, but you haven't used them in any particular detail, like a cyclic lock, for example. What I like about it is that it generally gives you a broader understanding of topics that you may not normally have used before. It also helps you understand why things are done. So maybe you've used public modifier and private modifier, but you've never really used package private, or you've never really used protected, or when you have, you haven't really understood why you've done it. Because again, unless you sit down and study these things, you only might have seen them in passing. In my opinion, it gives you a better understanding of why things are done. And because of that, it will make you a better programmer. When you're analyzing a class, you'll know things like if you want to make something immutable, one of the patterns you can learn is the immutability pattern. It will help you to make things more immutable and show you what, ways. It's not so much about making them immutable, but sometimes people make errors when they make things immutable. So for example, they'll have a private list and they'll expose it publicly, and the list reference will be immutable, but you can still modify the list itself. So I find it generally gives you a broad understanding and over all the topics and deep on some of the fundamentals. So with that, I'm going to start my first question. I will activate it in the poll now, so it'll take a second. 1 second. I've activated it now. It'll take a few seconds before you guys get to this part. But if you have if somebody could copy the link in again to the YouTube chat, if I don't have that already, I'll copy it again. If you guys want to take a minute to read it, I will also invite my fellow jug leaders and board to discuss in a minute. But take a minute to read it. Take a look, and I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to go over it. The question is basically, what do you think the output of this code snippet is? Give a little bit of time for the Zoom call to catch up. And feel free to click answer it, whatever you want. Or take a guess if you're not really sure. All right, from my fellow Java jug users, leaders, do you guys think you know what the answer is? Have you guys locked in your answers?
It's right here.
I know the answer.
Yeah.
All right, so what is it, just from the small group, what do you guys think the answer is?
It won't compile.
Very good. Do you know which line fails to compile?
Line 3.
Excellent. So Neha is right in this case. It is line 3. When you declare, this is a very complicated answer, and it's kind of indicative of what you might see on the exam. You'll see a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of details, a lot of extraneous stuff, a lot of variables, but it's actually the first line that doesn't compile because var has to be declared with a type. It can still be declared null, but you have to do something complicated where you do like string, you cast the null to a type. So you cannot declare a var variable without a type. So because of that, line 3 fails to compile, and you don't even need to read the rest of the code. So this is a good example where it's a lot of extraneous information and you don't really need it for the exam. And if you see these on the exam, when you take an exam, it's wonderful because it means you could stop reading and you could save a lot of time. 1 second, and the takeaway for this is var must be initialized when it is declared. All right, let's try question number 2. Let me activate that. It's similar to the first, but I made some changes to it. So let's try question number 2. And because there's a delay on YouTube, I'll give everyone 20 or 30 seconds to catch up with the delay. One second. All right, I think that's enough time. Let's see. Let me see if I can drag this in. 1 second. I'm going to drag in the results this time. All right, so I think people are still working on it, but while that's going, it seems like a lot of people picked C, and some people picked A. Anybody have a guess of what the answer is? I'll just tell you for this one, because it's similar to the other one. This one also does not compile, although this doesn't compile for a different reason. In this case, line 3 and 4 compile fine. Line 5 also compiles fine. Line 6 also compiles. So you don't have to set a value for a local variable when you create it. You could set it to no value. You could set it to no value, but line 7 doesn't compile. And the reason is because you're trying to use the value name before it's been initialized. So in this case, age is always greater than or equal to 0. So it might be true that it's always set to the value of Lisa. It's never set to anything else. But if you compare it with the previous question I did, I had an else statement that set it to Jennifer. So in this case, these lines were able to compile. And if line 3 had been good, line 8 would have been fine. But in the second version, it's not. There's no else branch for that. So the compiler will do its best to try to determine whether or not a value is initialized. But in this case, it's not going to evaluate that if statement in a meaningful way. It just needs to know that in all branches, the value is set. So because it's not, the local variable is not initialized, it cannot be used, and therefore line 7 doesn't compile. So these are the kind of things you might not see in code every day, but you will see if you're studying for the exam. Very common kind of exam question. So keep in mind, anytime you see a local variable, is it initialized before it's being used? Or is it initialized in all the places? Unlike, whereas var, one difference between this one and the second one is var, it has to be initialized when it's declared to something. In this one, though, it doesn't have to be initialized on line 6, it's fine. But line 7 should have had to, line 7 at that point, it wasn't set if the value of age was less than 0. So getting back to my presentations, again, I'm going to be interspersing these questions throughout. There's a lot of different ways to get certified. The most common way is one and done. You take a single test, you sign up for it, you take the test, and you pass it. Some score, it might be 50%, it might be 60%, it might be 80%, it depends on the test. But you take that test, you pass it, and you're certified. A more complicated way is you take a series of tests. And this is true for a lot of the Microsoft certifications, a lot of the older Java certification, 6, 7, and 8. You have to take 2 exams. And so for those, you have to take a lot of exams. They're more difficult because you have to pay for every exam, and you may not get a title until you finish all the exams. Sometimes they give partial titles or different titles. So in Java 7 and 8, you got an associate title. In Java 11, when the first exam came out, and I'll get to Java 11 in more detail, you didn't get a title for the first one. And they're often in fields where they're required. So a lot of jobs may say, for example, MCSE certified, or if you're an auditor, you might have an ASQ certification. So they're usually much more complicated. A third way to get certified, and probably my least favorite way to get certified, is attending a training course. This is one where you basically spend a lot of money. Usually it's company sponsored. You attend the training course, and by attending the training course, you get certified. And I find these to be the least valuable of certs because you can be sleeping through it. You can be on your phone the whole time, and you will still get certified. So they do exist, they do happen, but they're kind of a bit of they're a bit shady to me. Just by attending, you get certified. There's a variation on that though, where you attend a course maybe for a week, and at the end of it, you take an exam. Now that's different from just attending. So just attending and getting cert is not particularly exciting. But if you attend the course and you spend money and then you take the exam, then that's more meaningful because you actually were challenged. I've seen 2 variations on this though. One is you take a standard exam like the way you would take the first exam, in a room with a proctor, and everything's very serious, and you have 100 questions and you have to get 80%, and it's normal. Those are fine. I've also seen though from some organizations, and I won't say which ones, where you basically take a 10-question test, and if you get it wrong, the proctor comes over and basically lets you take it as many times as you want until you get it right. So that kind of falls more in the third category, where it's not as valuable of a cert because you just had to attend. And then the last one, and this is probably the most complicated one, and this is in specific fields, you have to have work experiences. You have to have letters of recommendations or proof. Medical fields, ASQ certs, other certs. It's not just a matter of taking a test. You actually have to have proof that you've worked in the industry or had a certain number of training days, for example, to get certified. So those are complicated. Luckily, Java certifications are nothing like that. One thing I do want to clarify is there's a difference between a certification title and a certification exam. Completing an exam can grant a title, but people can get the title from a number of different ways. So in Java, there are upgrade exams. You can take the regular exam, you can take the upgrade exam, you can take a series of exams. So at the end of the day, the title you get might be the same, but how you got it is very different. So keep in mind that they're not always one-to-one. If you have no previous stuff, they're usually one-to-one, but they're not always. And the general steps to become certified. So first you decide what cert you want to take. It could be in an area that you've been working with. Maybe you work with Java every day, but you want to learn more about it or get a deeper understanding. Maybe it's an area you want to learn, but you're not sure how to get started. I find reading a book and doing a certification to be a great motivator. You decide what exam you need to take for that title. So you pick it out your title. You have to figure out what exam to take because it may vary. It's usually 1-to-1, but not always. You create a study plan. You study, you schedule the exam, and then you take the exam. Now, I do have friends of mine who like to do the scheduling of the exam early on in the process as a motivator for the rest of the process. So if I start on April 1st and I schedule the exam for June or July, that motivates me for the next 3 months to be ready for that exam. So I find that to be a good motivation, but that's really up to you. So I will do another challenge question to break this up a little bit. I am activating it now. I don't know if the link's still fresh looks like the link's still fresh in the chat. So this one's kind of interesting. So these are 5 constructors. Some of them may compile, some of them may not. And let me know how many you think compile and how many you think don't compile. And we'll wait a little bit for everybody to get in sync. So again, which ones compile, which ones don't compile? We're looking for the number that compile. Give everyone 30 more seconds. I think people are still answering. I'll give it another 20 seconds for everybody. Oh, we're starting to see some answers come in now. 1 second. It seems to be an even split. There's no clear winner so far. Seems to be across the board. So I guess I'll turn it over to my jug leaders or my jug group. How many people think the first line compiles or doesn't compile? Either.
I chose that one.
As compiles or doesn't compile?
Does not compile.
You are correct. The reason it does not compile is because if a class doesn't extend another class, and these are things, by the way, you may remember from programming, but you don't think about, but when you're studying for the cert, you do think about it, is another way to put it. So in general, so what I was gonna say is every class, if it doesn't inherit from an explicit class, inherits from object, Java lang object. And you don't really think about it, but when you're studying for the cert, you do have to think about it. So in this case, there is no object constructor that takes a value. They only have the no-R constructor. So the first line, if there was one in object, the first line would compile. So the first one does not compile. What about the second line? Mike, do you think that one compiles?
Well, the same thing. Well, I don't know if there's a default constructor in object. That it could be, right? So yeah. It could compile. Okay. Yeah.
So that one does compile because there is not one that takes null, but there is one that takes the empty or not empty, but lack of arguments, no argument. Default no-R constructor is the formal term, but there is one. So the second line, so one of these does compile. And by the way, I'll slide over and show some of the results so far. So we've got a very mixed bag. So going on to the second class, so Flurry extends snow. Now, one thing you have to remember is, and you hear this a lot when you're studying for the cert, is the compiler will insert a default no-R constructor if, and only if, you declare no constructors. So in this case, if snow had no constructors, then there would be a constructor, and I could write it out. Hold on 1 second. Bear with me 3 seconds. So if there were no constructors here, the compiler would automatically insert snow, would automatically insert a no-R constructor. But since there is, so let's see, this one, no, this one, yes. So because there is, though, it won't do that. So in this case, the first one, let's go with the first compiler, not the first compiler, first constructor. Between Neha, Mike, Barry, do you guys think this one compiles? I will say this is a tricky one. You're probably not going to see unless you're studying for a cert.
Right.
I'm not hanging out. I'm too busy watching the monitoring tech director.
Sure, Barry. The answer is no, it does not.
Oh, okay.
And,
Yeah.
and this is a
The
tricky
one
one.
F.
Because this is not something that you're likely to see every day. What it is the compiler has detected a cyclic dependency. So this calls the constructor itself. So because it's passing a float. And you may think the compiler can't detect that, but it absolutely can, and it will not compile with that. So, and if it's the same if you have constructors calling each other, if it ever detects a loop, it will not allow it to compile. What about the third one?
That should compile. It's an
I
empty.
got Mike on this one. I'm happy I got
Oh,
Mike
you
on this
did.
one. So this would compile if there was a constructor in the snow class that was the no argument constructor.
Oh, okay,
In
that's
this
right.
case,
right.
both constructors,
Yeah.
one constructor
I
for
have-
int.
yeah.
Yep. And there's a constructor. So I got Mike on one. There's a constructor for int and a constructor for string. In this case, there's not a constructor. If you remove these two constructors, it would compile because then the compiler would insert it. And then the last one does compile. Actually,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So the correct answer to this one was 2, and I got a few people on this one, so that makes me happy. Not that I like tricking people, it's fun when I can. Let me move on to the next question. Bear with me. I think it's from current slide. All right, back to the slideshow. Activate it. Oh, wait, no. I have to actually go to the next page. Takeaways are no argument constructors are inserted if the class does not define any. If you don't call a constructor explicitly, the first line of every constructor will be a call to super, and you can't have circular constructors. So lots of things that you might take for granted when you're normally studying, you do need to know for the cert. So I'm going to go on to question number 4. Take a few minutes to read it, and I will wait for everyone to catch up. I should learn to hum while waiting for the feed to catch up. Let me see how far behind we are. Still a few seconds. So take a few minutes to read it. Let me know what you guys think, and feel free to put comments in the chat. Copy the link again, just so we have it. I'm starting to see people answer, so they must be caught up in time or becoming caught up in time. Some of these have different levels of difficulties, and different levels of trickiness. That's a better way to put it. Some of them are easy. They're not all hard. All right, I'm starting to see some feedback coming in. So take your time. Feel free to answer. Okay. So far, so good. A few people have answered so far. So since we're back in time, I'll start describing the solution. So this is a tricky one. I will say this is probably one of my trickier ones. The first line, I'm going to switch to interactive so I can actually type on this. So the first line compiles fine. It's an interface. The second line also compiles. Now, one thing you have to know about this, and again, you know this when you're studying for the cert, is Java will automatically insert certain, what I call implicit modifiers. I don't know if it's an official term, but it's a term I use. But Java will insert implicit modifiers into interfaces, whether you insert them or not. So in this case, it will insert public into that method, and then it will also insert public static into that constant. Whether you insert them or not, they will be inserted automatically because it's an interface. Now, that won't be the same for private methods and static methods and other method types, but for an abstract method and a constant, they will be inserted. So because of that, that might change what you think the answer is now. So the class power compiles just fine. The class electric, let's go with that. It extends power and implements grid. It defines another value of level, and then it tries to print that. So this actually does not compile, and the reason it does not compile is very tricky. It's an invalid method override. I'm not going to subject my Java leaders to asking them because this is a harder one, so I don't want to embarrass them. But it does not compile because if you notice, I added the public to the grid class, which means now while it's implicit in an interface, it's not implicit in a class.
Yeah, it's private by default, right?
Yeah,
right.
This is package
right. Private, right? Okay. Yep.
So when you override a method, you cannot reduce the visibility of that method. And in this case, we are. It goes from public to package private, so the compiler will not compile. And since that's the only line that fails to compile, the answer is D. And in this case, let me stretch this out a little bit. A lot of people more difficult on this one, so that's good. But that one's probably one of the hardest ones I have today. Sorry, move that around. That's probably one of the harder ones I have today. So don't knock yourself if you got it wrong. That's a particularly difficult one. But that's the reason it doesn't compile. So the takeaway is you can't reduce the visibility of an inherited method, and also some interface methods, some of them. Now, it used to be there were only two types of interface methods or interface types, abstract interface methods and constants. But then they added private static, default, and private static as one. So there are a lot more options now. So there aren't as many implicit ones, but on the original ones, being the abstract method and the constant, they are still required, or they are still implicit modifiers. So a little bit about the history. I'm going to go a little bit about the history about the Java certification. It used to be called the Sun certifications, and that was because Sun owned Java, and then Oracle bought it. So if you have a Sun certification, some of them are upgradable to Java or Oracle certifications. They're administered by Parson View for Oracle. So you go to Parson View's website, you register, you pick your testing center, or you pick at home, you pay some fee, and then you get your exam scheduled. I find the results are immediately available after finishing. I've heard that it could take a few minutes. In my experience, it's basically as soon as I finish my cert test, I grab my phone and the results are available instantaneously. Now, you don't get the title right away. Remember earlier I said there's a difference between the exam and the title. The exam results are available right away, but the title might not be available for a few days, depending on how long it takes for Oracle to update their system. Oh, sorry, jumped ahead. There's three exams that currently, or three types of titles you could currently get. There's the Java Certified Foundation Associate, which is a beginner non-programmer exam. And I say non-Java or non-Java programmer because it's not really meant for people using Java every day. It's really meant for like managers, people who only have a passing familiarity with Java. And I also say it's Java 8-ish because it is Java 8, but they use very little that's Java 8 on the exam. So they don't use like lambdas and streams. It's mostly, Java, almost Java 4, Java 5 level questions. So it's a very simple exam. It's a lot of like order of operation, adding two numbers, what's an if statement. So if you're a Java programmer, you could probably pass this without much study because it's very, very basic stuff. That said, there are plenty of things that could trip you up. So study. The second exam, the title you can get is Associate Exam. Now, you can only get this for Java 8. They do not have a Java 11 Associate Exam. And they tend to be reasonably difficult. It's a lot of core Java. I say entry level, but it's really core Java technologies or core Java foundation. So if then statements, while, switch, some lambda, and some basic constructors, overloading methods, overloading, overriding, what have you. So there's a lot of different options available for that, or a lot of different features for that. Then there's the Oracle Certified Professional Exam. Now, this is the one that generally is harder, or the title, I should say. And for Java 8, you have to complete 2 exams. And I'll get into the exams in the next slide. We have to complete 2 exams. For Java 11, you now only have to complete 1 exam. So the title is very similar for both, but you can be Certified Professional 8 or 11. A lot of people on the Code Ranch where I moderate ask, should I get the 8 or the 11? I always recommend getting the newest, for 2 reasons. One, better education. You're learning the most recent stuff. It's not stale. And 2, then it gives you one less thing to do later. So if you get the Java 11 8, now, are you going to get the Java 11 when Java 17 comes out? Like it's better to get the most recent in my experience. I've interviewed candidates who had like the Java 1.2 or 1.3 cert and had it updated in 20 years. And it's, I mean, at that point, I would just remove it from your resume. But it's questionable when you have like a really old cert. So it's better to keep it somewhat fresh. And here's a little bit of the history. It started, I'm not going to go, there were certs before this, but that would be even a bigger graph. It started, the most recent ones I'm going to list are the Sun Certified Java Associate, Sun Certified Java Programmer. When Oracle took over, they renamed them to the Oracle Certified Java Associate, the Oracle Certified Java Programmer. And then they changed a little bit. They modified a little bit where they split into the OCA and the OCP exam. And to get when you completed the OCA cert, test, you got the OCA cert. And when you completed both the OCA and the OCP test, you got the OCP cert. So you actually had to complete 2 exams to get the Java 7 or 8 title. Now, if you had an upgrade exam, this is completely different. Upgrade exams are all special cases, so and that's even a bigger diagram, so I'm not going to get into that. But an upgrade exam might be if you had a Java 5 cert and there's an upgrade for Java 8, you could go right to it with only taking 1 exam. So, and in theory, it covers the differences between the Java 5 and Java 8, although it's not always the case. The latest stuff, though, is the foundation exams and the Java 11 exam. So a little bit about the Java 8 exams. There's an 808 exam and 809 exam. Again, I'm not going to get into upgrade exams because that's just complicated and it depends on your background. But it's very simple. The 808 is relatively straightforward. Order of operations, constructors, modifiers, overloading methods. A lot of the questions I've asked up till now would have been covered by the 808. And when you complete it, you get the title of Oracle Certified Associate. Then the 809 is a much broader test. So things that you definitely, I don't think anybody has experience in everything unless you just happen to be studying for a cert. But NIO2, concurrency, JDBC, IO, serialization, security, annotations. Well, actually, annotations is actually Java 11, not Java 8, but I'm glossing over that for now. But in order to get the title, you have to complete both exams. So you get one title from the first, you'll get one title from completing both. You can take them out of order. It just means that when you finish the 809, you're not going to get a title. And when you finish the 808, then you'll get both titles, but you can take them out of order. The Java 11 exams, currently there are two. The 819 exam, and that's the one I'm going to talk about the most during this presentation, and the 817 exam. The 819 is basically a full exam. It's not an upgrade exam. It's just, there's no prerequisites. You just take it. It's a relatively new exam, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's 90 minutes with 50 questions, and it requires 68 to pass. It is what I would consider probably one of the hardest of the exams. Of all the exams, probably the hardest exam I'll discuss today because of the time limit. It is a very, and I'll get into details about the exam, but it is a very hard exam to do in that time. On the other hand, if you have a previous Java cert, you may qualify to take the 817 exam, which is in my opinion, and this is completely subjective, but in my opinion, it's an easier exam because it tests only half the stuff that the 819 tests, and you also have a lot more time per question. So 3 hours versus an hour and a half is a lot different. You have a lot more time, and the score to pass is lower. So if you're deciding which one to take, if you have the previous cert, I would try to take the 817. It's not that 819 isn't a good exam. It's just, it's going to be harder. I could guarantee you that much. So both exams will give you the title of Oracle Certified Professional. Both will feature modules heavily. So if you have not studied modules, do not bother taking the exam. Modules are probably the one thing that many Java developers haven't even touched yet. So you should definitely study them, and you should study what's going to be on the exam for them, because if you don't know modules, it will definitely hurt your score. And as I mentioned, the upgrade exam tends to be easier if you have a previous cert. Now, there is something called the 815 and the 816 exam. And the 815 and 816 exam don't exist anymore, unfortunately. And if you look at our books, we have 815 and 816 on the title, which, believe me, what Oracle did is they came out with two exams, similar to the OCA and the OCP exams, but you didn't get a title for completing one of them. So if you completed the 815, you got no title. You had to complete both to get the professional title. And then about a year later, they changed their mind and came out with the 819 exam. Now, for all intents and purposes, the 819 is really the combination of those two exams. So if you bought our Java 11 books, they absolutely, the material is the same. It's about a 95% overlap between what was on the 815 and 816 versus what's on the 819. We also created, for the 5% that isn't the same, though, we created a guide which basically tells you, and released it for free, which basically tells you what you're missing. So if you do use our books, you should read that guide, because there's things you don't have to study, and there's a few things like due privilege. If you've never heard of due privilege, you're in for a treat, that you do have to study. So just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, we can't, Gene and I would, if we could put a sticker of 819 over our books, we would, because it really is the same material. We actually worked with Oracle when they were coming out with the 819 exam. We don't necessarily want the exam, but we help them with some of the objectives to try to refine them so that it more closely covered the 815 and 816.
Hey, Scott, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Okay, so with the upcoming long-term release or long-term support release of JDK 17 in September,
yep.
Are there any plans by Oracle to offer cert in that, or is that too soon?
I would expect it, but I can't say with certainty.
Okay.
There were people who had asked me. I can tell you this much: I don't think they're going to come out with certifications for non-LTS releases. So it's unlikely they're going to have like a Java 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16 cert. The most likely event would be a Java 17 cert.
Because you're going to have new things like pattern matching, records, sealed classes, all that good stuff. So,
well, keep in mind that because the 819 is a broad exam, that's a good question. But because the 819 is a broad exam, while you will have a lot of new stuff, all the old stuff like NIO2, concurrency, annotations, security, they could all be in play for the new exam. So we won't know for sure until they release the syllabus. But I would say it's probably. I would venture to say it's probably only gonna be about 10 to 20% of new information, but we'll have to wait to see the objectives come out to know. Because there's a lot of fundamentals they test.
Awesome, thanks.
As an example, there's fundamentals they test that are like really from Java like 1.4 or something that are still valid. So I will move on to my next question. Probably should have had it up on the screen while we were talking, Mike. Take a minute to read it. I will let people catch up. Oh, let me do that. Oops. My screen got larger. Take a minute to read it. And by the way, one thing I didn't say is don't worry about imports. I'll say this on the exam for the exam too. I think I said this later in the later slide. You don't have to worry about imports on the exam unless something on the exam is specifically asking about like a static import, or there's a conflicting import, like using both versions of list. You generally don't. They used to actually have a note in the exam that said, basically, if we forgot an import, ignore that, because they would sometimes forget an import and people would mark the question wrong. So I don't list imports in these questions, and on the exam, imports generally don't matter. The only exception would be if they ever had a static import. If there's a question with a static import, then they do matter. That's like the only time they would matter. If you haven't done static imports, that's something to learn. So give people a minute. I don't know if we need to put the poll back in the YouTube chat, but I will add it just in case. All right, people are starting to read it. Oh, we're getting a wide variety of answers. That's interesting. All right, so I will turn this over to my illustrious crew. Anybody want to venture a guess?
All right, I said gift with the space because I thought that the random numbers are between 0 and 1.
Okay.
So therefore, that statement of being less than true will always be true.
Okay.
Yeah,
that is correct. That gift is printed on the line, but the date is also printed.
Well, that's only because of the else that.
So I purposely wrote this one poorly because the exam does this. Oh, let me see.
More indentation.
So this was question number 5. Let me scroll down to it. So how a compiler would really read this is like that. So I purposely did not put brackets in there, and I purposely. So this is purposeful, but this is the kind of thing that the exam will have. Like this is not a stretch to say that this is not what I would call an unfair question. This is absolutely something valid for the exam, but it's something that you have to be aware of. So the answer is A in this case. It will print gift, right, and then it will print the date
and the local date. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if this was Python, that'll be a whole nother story.
Well, if this was any language where indentation matters. And if this was YAML, everything matters for indentation. So it would be a whole other world. But indentation does matter. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's a relatively easy question, but when you're, as I mentioned, you only have 90 minutes for 50 questions, so you might miss that. So you really have to watch your branches. So let me activate the next question. Question number 6. And what we're looking for here is some of the lines may compile, some of the lines may not. Which is the first line that does not compile, or alternatively, do all the lines compile? Now, if you've noticed, I didn't say line 2 or line 6, which on the exam is a giveaway. That means 2 and 6 do compile, so you're good there. And I'm going to switch to interactive mode while you guys are reading this, so I can type while I'm doing this. I think I'm still waiting for the live feed to catch up. Yep, still catching up. So take a minute, and when you think you know the answer, feel free to answer. While you guys are doing that, I'll briefly show you some of the answers for the previous one. So some people did get it right, but there was a distribution on the last one for question 5. Oh, did I? Or did I sorry, did I not activate this one? Oh, sorry. I didn't activate the poll for that one, I don't think. I apologize for that. But it is activated now. Sorry about that. It's been on the screen, so if you're watching the presentation, you're good, but I just activated it now. I apologize for that. So take another 30 seconds if I didn't activate it properly. People are starting to answer, so we could probably start discussing. Give me another 10 seconds. Well, by the time these words come out, it'll have caught up on the feed. Neha, if you're around, do you want to take a venture to guess? If Neha's around, or Barry or Mike. So just to give a quick background, this falls under a lot of the new interface methods. So the first line, or line 3, is a constant. Line 2 is tricky because I'll get into that in a minute. I'll skip line 4 for now. Line 5 is a static method. Line 6 is a default method. So a lot of things, there's a lot of new interface method types, including default, private, static, whatever, abstract, and they have a lot of different rules associated with it. And as I mentioned earlier, there are implicit modifiers that get implied. So public, static automatically gets implied to line 3, and that one compiles without issue. Line 4 has a little bit of a problem. So there is no, it's not clear if this is a static method or a private method or a default method. There's no indication of which one it is. And in this case, the compiler will not insert anything. It will not like automatically insert default, for example, if I could type default. So this actually line does not compile.
Oh.
Because there's no, if I change this to be private, it would compile. If I change it to be static or public static or whatever, any of the or if I change it to be a default method, it would compile. But the compiler will not insert anything automatically for that type of method because it doesn't know which one it is. So that line does not compile. Line 5, although, also does not compile. I'm surprised no one chose that as one of the answer choices. Line 5 doesn't compile because there's no return value. So if you look at, I'm surprised nobody picked it actually. If you look at return, the return type is int, but there's no return value. So just keep in mind, so the 819. So if this was the 815 and 16, they wouldn't have mixed things like that. But on the 819, they may throw things out there that are distractions. So line 5 also does not compile. Line 6 does compile. The default, there is an implicit modifier for default, which is public. Default methods are implicitly public. So for example, if you put private here, that would fail to compile, but the compiler will automatically insert public. And in this case, if the other 2 methods were fixed and properly accessible, then 7 and 8 would also compile. Right now, they're not going to compile because line 4 doesn't compile. So
let me ask this, Scott. All right.
Sure.
So what was bothered me about this is because there's a difference between interface and abstract.
Yes.
Where abstract has at least one declared method, where I thought interface, all of the methods had to be just declared and implemented in,
not since Java 8 and Java 11.
Okay.
So with the introduction of those, there are 6 different types. I often like to do as an interview question, name the different types of members you could have in an interface to see what version of Java they're currently on. Because as of now, I believe, unless I'm miscounting, there are 6. Constants, abstract are the originals, and then default methods, private, static, and static. I miscounted one. So it's changed now, and the rules are different for those, and they can be difficult to use. Like some of the rules can be complicated. So it's not like, even when I wrote this, it wasn't immediately clear why line 4 didn't compile. But if you think about it, it does. It doesn't know if that's a private method, a default method, or a static method, and it's not going to guess. There are things that will guess, and a lot of the reason it guesses is it guesses for backwards compatibility. So backwards compatibility with older versions of Java are the abstract methods and the constants. Interfaces contain a lot of rules. You need to study all the new rules. There's no simple answer for that. You just need to understand them. So moving on to the next section, the 819 exam is the exam I'm going to talk the most about because it's the current one. It's not the upgrade one. It's the full one. It is a very time-limited exam. Let me just make sure I'm. It is a very time-limited exam. There are, unlike the previous, it is also very different from the previous exams. So the Java 5, 6, 7, 8 OCA and OCP or SCJP, whatever we want to call it, were all relatively similar. And they all had relatively short questions with only 4 or 5 answer choices, and you might pick 1 or pick 2. The 819 tends to be longer. It tends to be full class implementations. I've seen some options with like 8 answers. A through like the letter A through the letter H or more. So and it might say pick 3. The exam will tell you how many correct answers there are. So it's not going to say, in our books, we sometimes, or we frequently put choose all that apply because we want to make it harder. But the exam will say 3 are correct, 2 are correct, 1 is correct. It will tell you, but it is a much harder exam with a lot longer questions. I mean, if they were short questions, I think it would be easier, but they're not. So you really have to pace yourself. The wrong screen. You really have to pace yourself. You have to watch the clock. So with the other exams, watching the clock was important, but it wasn't critical. If you're sitting the 819 exam, you have to be watching the clock. Even when I take it myself, I have to make sure, because if you've gotten through 25 questions and you've used up more than half the time, then you're going to have even less time on the remaining questions. All questions are weighted equally. So there's not, some questions are not worth more than others. Some, well, I'll get back to this. So all questions are weighted equally. So if a question's really long and hard, skip it. Answer the shortest questions first. You get more points for completing 10 short questions than you do for one really long question. Now, there are questions on the exam that are experimental or beta. Oracle likes to do this as a trial. So some questions will not be graded. You won't know which ones those are, though. So, a lot of people see things on the exam that aren't covered by our books. And we've actually talked to Oracle in like cases, some of those are beta questions. So it's not necessarily that we didn't cover it. It's just they like to change things. Also, keep in mind, they can change the cert all the time. They do add or remove objectives. They do add or remove questions. We generally notify, on our website when this happens, but they are not entirely static. The 819 has been static, but traditionally they can change. In the past, they've changed. You can mark questions for review while you're taking it. You used to be able to cross out wrong answers. So if there were 6 choices, you could cross out the ones you've eliminated. They seem to have removed that in the recent version of the software. I'm not really sure why, but they used to have the ability to remove incorrect ones. So we're going to go to question 7, which I'm going to activate now. I think the link is still fresh. Oh, yes, we do depend on IntelliJ and Eclipse. If you are studying for the cert, I do recommend studying without a IDE. It's better. I mean, the IDE is gonna show you things are wrong immediately. It's better if you could figure out what's wrong by yourself. So studying with a notepad or turning off some of the syntax checking is better if you're studying. I mean, it's great in every day, but when you're studying, you really need to think about it. So let's see. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Barry, we produced both of those books in under a year, and by literally on a year anniversary is when we were notified they were out of date. They are still relevant for the 819 exam, though, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not just saying that. If you read either the complete study guide, which is a combined book, or the 2 individual books, you will have more than enough to pass the 819 exam. That said, it is a hard exam. All right, so I'm seeing people starting to respond. Anybody from my Java peanut gallery, my Java user group, want to venture a guess on this one? I'll give everybody a minute or a second. So this one's a bit challenging. Let me drop to interactive mode. So there's something new in Java. Well, it's by Java 11. I can't remember if it's 9, 10, or 11. I sometimes forget the non-LTS releases. But let's say by Java 11, where you could use before Java 11 or before Java, starting in Java 11, 9, 10, or 11, and somebody in the chat could probably tell me which one it is. You could create a resource and use it in a try with resource statement before the declaration of the resource. So in Java 8, it wouldn't have been allowed. So in this case, you want to use that resource. Now, what is the syntax of that resource? In that case, the answer is actually just is. So you don't have to declare it again. You don't have to give it a variable. You don't use colons. You just say try is, and you could use the resource that's been declared previously. Now, that's new in Java 11 or one of the versions of Java 11. But that is actually not the correct answer. So D looks like the correct answer, but it's actually not the correct answer. The correct answer is E. In this case, this is actually a trick question, but something that could definitely come up on the exam. The one rule you have to know about this again, not something you'd study every day, but if you're studying for a cert, it will come up. But the one rule about using a resource in a try with resource is it has to be final or effectively final. In this case, final, you can mark it final by just putting the word final in front of it, or it could be effectively final. And that means, if you're not familiar with it, is you can't modify it after it's been written or after it's been assigned a value. In this case, I wrote a kind of a cute line of garbage collection here, which is a bit of a cheat, and it changes the value of IS. Now it changes it after it's used, but it still changed it. So this is not effectively final. It's not final nor effectively final, which means it can't be used with a try with resource statements. And the answer is E. So this is actually a compiler error. If you remove this line, the correct answer would be D. But because that line is there at the bottom, it does not work, and it's a trick question. But this is a fair question because you do have to know rules like this for the exam. And it looks like I tripped some people up, but not a huge number of people up. So I'll go back to the next one. Study final versus effectively final, and understand the rules for declaring resources with try with resource statements. All right, let me activate the next one. So we've got our robot class, and the question is, what is the output, or is the output does not compile, or is the output none of the above? So what is the correct answer for this? And I'll take a minute for everybody to catch up. I'll copy the poll in the chat again, just in case anybody needs it. I asked my Java leaders a similar question to this earlier today, so let's see if they were paying attention. Looks like people are starting to respond, so we'll give a second. One of the reasons I'm doing polling, we're kind of trialing this software, we hadn't used it before, is I do like to do these chats or these talks in person, but because we're doing everything remote, this is the next best thing. So I do like, I much prefer doing these at Code One. If you've never been to Code One, it's sponsored by Oracle. It's a wonderful event. I've met a lot of wonderful people there, some of the people on this call, and it's a great event to attend. And there's other conferences as well that are wonderful to attend. All righty. Looks like we're starting to get people give responses. Looks like there's an even split so far between B and C. Looks like there's an even split between them. Mike or Barry or Neha, you guys want to take a venture to guess? Or Paul, you're on. You want to take a venture to guess on what this one is? I did ask you a similar question earlier.
Yep. It's Wally.
Okay. Why is it Wally?
Because it's when you create the object, it's the first statement there where name equals Wally that gets printed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I tricked you in part because I gave Mike a different question earlier as a practice question, and that was the correct answer. But I made one small change to this, Mike.
Oh, there was a static versus. Oh, geez.
No,
Okay.
no, that's not it. I made one tiny change that's almost unnoticeable. Just sorry, Mike. I had some fun.
That's
This
okay.
is question 8, and the tiny change is this: there is no default no-R constructor for this class.
Oh. Okay.
So this is a question that looks like it's about order of initial, and the exam could absolutely do this, but it looks like it's about order of initialization. In point of fact, it's initialized. The value is initialized initially with Johnny 5. Then the instance initializer. Hold on, this is question 8. Yeah. The instance initializer gets called, and well, there's a whole. I'm not going to get into the whole class organization, but it calls the parent class, it calls the current class, it calls instance initializers, and finally it calls the constructor. In this case, though, there is no R constructor. If you had null there, for example, that would work. But in this case, there is none, so that does not work. So the code does not compile, and the answer is D. Now if you put null or some other value there so that it would call this constructor, the answer is still not Wally. The answer is actually C, C3PO. And that's because name is used twice. So one thing, if you remember, name is the method argument. It has to actually be this dot name equals Wally. So I have multiple tricks in this one. That's why I chose this one. So if in this case, if this was the corrected code, then B would be the correct answer. So that was a challenging one for a variety of reasons. Go back to the slides. All right, so just one second. And watch for subtle issues. Always check constructor calls. Always check constructor calls. So one of the last sections I'll get to today is preparing for the exam. Just move something out of the way. So buy a study guide. I'm biased on which one you should buy. There are other study guides though. Mala has a great study guide. Bert Bates and Kathy Sierra have great study guides. You could also just study from the Java APIs. What's different about our book, versus studying on your own is we're really customizing it. We have Gene and I have two goals in mind. One is to make sure you have a solid foundation. And the other is to make sure that you understand what you need to know for the exam. Because as you saw in some of the questions I've asked so far, it's not obvious what the question might be looking for. So we really focus on both those. We have ridiculously long debates about things that are and are not in scope for the exam. So there's things that we think are important but are not in scope for the exam. And then there are things that we don't think are important but are in scope for the exams. And we try to find a nice compromise on that. And we spend a lot of time debating those. So if you're going to write a book, I recommend writing with someone you can debate with. You should absolutely make a certification plan, especially if you're taking the 819. It's a lengthy exam, and if you read both of our books, it's a lot of work. So it's Rome wasn't built in a day. If you've been an experienced Java developer, you're probably going to need less time. If you're not experienced or you haven't been doing it enough, you may need more time. So factor that in. How comfortable you are with the language. Also set a date. You may need a lot of time. So I think the average studying time is about 2 to 3 months, but you may be able to do it in a month. Doing it in a week would be hard unless you had a previous cert and you had a lot of experience with it, because there's just a lot of new stuff to learn. It might take you longer. So keep in mind and also remember it's 2 exams that used to be 1. So it used to be you'd study for like 2 or 3 months for the first exam, study for 2 or 3 months for the second exam. Now it's all just one massive exam. Create an Oracle account if you don't already have one. One tip I like to give out is to form a study group. So I've done this with coworkers where we've all agreed to get certified and we all have a lunch, like a once a week lunch session. It kind of helps you stay honest and remember to, practice. I find it's a good motivator to do it as a group. I find those are usually the most people who are most successful is when you do it as a group. Schedule the certification early on. For me, I scheduled almost immediately because I want to keep that date. Keep a weekly pace or a goal. And don't finish a section if you're not really sure about it, especially as I'm going to get into some of the sections really matter for later sections. And I'll show you which one those are in a minute. And remember something, knowledge on the material isn't the same as the exam material. So you might know Java really well, but I could still trip you guys up with some of these questions. And based on the responses, I definitely trip some people up. So, and that's because I know the cert really well. It also means I know Java really well, but they're not exactly one and the same. That you have to test both. The exam is going to test the boundaries of what you're familiar with. So you may be familiar with overriding methods, but you may not. I don't know if I said overload or override. I sometimes misspeak and say both. But what you might be familiar with overriding methods in Java, but you might not know some of the subtle rules. So, for example, covariant return types. If you're not familiar with covariant return type, congratulations, it's a very confusing term. But it's when you have like subclasses as the return type to overridden methods. It may test features you haven't used. I doubt everyone's used all the features. I doubt almost anyone on this call has used modules. I imagine very few people have used modules. I hadn't used NIO2. That was relatively new to me. Some of the other stuff I had used, but it varies. Most questions are fair, I will say. Some of them might seem, some of them might be tricky, but I would say they're all fair. There was 1 or 2 questions that they had on Java 8, I think they got rid of in Java 11, which is like benefits of Java, which in my opinion and Gene's opinion were highly subjective questions. It was very subjective kind of questions. So those were a little bit less fair. Like what's the best reason to use Java was kind of a subjective question, but they've gotten rid of a lot of those. So most of the questions left are pretty fair. And then you have to decide if you're ready. If I would say read the study materials at least twice or at least browse them the second time. In our books, we have review questions at the end of every chapter. So you should take those frequently and make sure you're scoring well. You should also we have practice exam. There's also plenty of online people who offer practice exams. You shouldn't take those too much because you want to take the review questions a lot, but you only want to do the practice questions sparingly. In machine learning parlance, it's kind of like, training too much on the test set. You want to train on the training data and then only test the test set infrequently. There's also something called exam dumps, which are terrible things. They're basically people who've somehow gotten a copy exam and posted them online. I would not recommend doing those. First of all, it's violating a bunch of laws, but I'm not even going to get into that. It's often, riddled with spyware and other things. Like if you even go to those websites, they're often scam websites and they want you to give credit card information to get them. So I would just steer clear of them in general. Plus, at the end of the day, as I said at the beginning, the goal should really be education, not the cert. So if you study for the cert but never take it, that's fine. If you learned a lot, then mission accomplished. To me, getting the cert is really an ancillary goal. Most people who take it tend to take it with on-site testing. You bring an ID. I always bring like a printed receipt. You don't have to, you can bring your phone, but I don't like handing my phone to strangers, so I'd rather bring a printed receipt. Nothing is allowed inside the exam. They often give you a locker, but don't assume they do. But don't bring a ton of money or cash or credit cards or this. Bring the bare minimum, really. You can put your wallet in a locker, for example, or purse. No writing material is allowed in at all. The exam center should provide you with either a dry erase board or a pencil and paper. Although if they give you a dry erase board, I find they don't always give you the eraser. Basically, if you fill up the dry erase board, you have to ask for another dry erase board, or you get your hands dirty. So it's bizarre, but that's been some centers. Exam centers may be cold, so I recommend dressing in layers, something you could take off if it gets too cold. They also may be noisy. I've had exam centers offer me earplugs. I'm not sure if you're allowed to bring your own earplugs, because you're not allowed to bring anything. So I don't think you're allowed to bring your own, but I have had some that have given me earplugs because there was loud noises outside, or there's other people in the room. Like there might be somebody next to you sneezing every 5 minutes, or just making loud noises or moving around in their chair. And you can't really control that. So, good luck to you if that happens to you, if you're one of those people. There is something that actually started before COVID and came in time for COVID, which is at-home testing. Now, at-home testing sounds great, but I don't like it. I'm biased on this. I prefer in-person testing, and I'll explain some of the reasons. The rules for it are pretty stringent. So your desk has to be completely clear. You have to take your camera, point it around the room. There can't be books within view. There can't be papers in view. There can't be anything on the wall. You basically have to have a completely clean room. I don't know if having a book on the shelf is allowed, but there's a long list of things that you're not allowed to have around you. Some of the companies, depending on which organization, you have to install software to monitor your computer to make sure, for example, like it's usually done in a browser, but you're not alt-tabbing over to Google and looking up the answer. I'm not a huge fan of installing software that monitors what I'm doing on my computer, even if it is coming from a reputable organization. So that right there, you shouldn't do that on a work computer. But that's enough to turn me off right there. Some, and I think Oracle is one of them, use eye tracking software. So you have to maintain eye contact with the screen. If you're looking up, if you're looking to the side, if you're looking down, if you're looking over, they can detect that. The eye tracking software will flag that, and they will actually give you an alert on the screen that basically says, please look at the screen or you're going to fail. I've heard feedback from users that that's incredibly stressful. I think it would be, I think it sounds incredibly stressful. I wouldn't want to be that person. So eye tracking, another reason I wouldn't do it. And then you also immediately fail for any interruption. So if you have a child or a pet or a friend come in the room, a roommate, you basically have to barricade yourself in your room and no one can interrupt you. If you have to use the bathroom, whereas a testing center, you're allowed to use the bathroom, you are not at home. If your internet goes down, that's your fault and you fail the exam. You can try to get a refund, but it may or may not work. At a testing center, if their internet goes down, that's a testing center's fault and they're going to give you a refund. If you're at home though, and they should give you a refund. If you're at home and your internet goes down, that's on you. And again, you may be able to still get a refund, but you have to prove it at that point. So there's a lot of different things that make me not want to take it at home. Now, if you don't live near a testing center, that's fine. But you just be aware you have to be basically in a barricaded room. No one can come in or out during the test, yourself included. Everything has to be clear. So there's a lot of stringent requirements, and you can go through all the requirements on Oracle's website as well as other testing centers. So very stringent requirements. Additional tips, get a good night's rest. That's probably the most important thing. I mean, even when I'm studying for a cert, at a certain point, I just stop studying. I go to bed, I sleep as many hours as I can, 8, 10, 12 hours, and I wake up and just take the exam. Cramming does not usually work well, especially for exams that have limited time. If you've only got 50 minutes to answer 80 questions or whatever the number is, 90 minutes to answer 50 questions, cramming isn't going to help. You really need a good night's rest. You need a full amount of energy. You always want to ask, does the code compile? Because as you saw in my very first question, the first line didn't compile. If you find the compiler error early on, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. You could basically just, you don't have to read the rest of the question. If you saw the compiler error in the first question, you're done with the rest of the question. Some questions don't have a does not compile option. I actually like those. That means every line compiles. So when every line compiles, you could actually use that for reference for other questions. So those are kind of a gift, because maybe you weren't sure about a switch statement or a switch expression and later lines compile. Well, then that means, all the lines compile in that question. It means you can use that as comparison in other questions. So anytime there's no does not compile answer, that's a gift. Some things you do just have to memorize. Command line options for modules you have to memorize. Or unless you just happen to know those really well. I always forget personally comparable versus comparator. I always forget just like off the top of my head, which one has compare, which one has compare to, the exact syntax. So I actually usually memorize that right before I go in and then just write it on the whiteboard as my first thing to write down. It's not that I can't figure it out. Like if I sat down and thought about it, okay, comparable, well, that sounds like something you inherit. Or comparator, that sounds like something you apply. I can figure it out, but you don't have a lot of time to do it. So certain things you should just memorize if you don't know. Every question has a purpose. And if you could find the purpose, you could also answer the question quickly. So in some of them, the purposes will be obvious. Like if you see a try with resource, the question is probably about try with resource. If you see a lot of constructor calls, it's probably about constructor calls. That doesn't mean they won't have subtle things. So there was one which looked like it was about order of initialization, and it was actually about an invalid constructor call. So it doesn't mean they won't trip you up, but if you could find the purpose, it's better. As I mentioned earlier, you could ignore imports. If process of elimination always helps, if you can limit it down to 2 answers, best guess, and you'll save yourself a lot of time. So I'm down to my last 2 questions for today. I will activate them now. They should be a little bit shorter, actually. Or actually, this one is 10 is not short, but 9 should be short. So I will give a few minutes for the group to catch up and see how you guys do on this one. I guess it's short on lines of code, but not necessarily on processing. All right, since we're a little bit short on time, I do want to move along. So anyone from the Java group want to answer before I tell you guys what the answer is?
All right, well,
Venture a guess?
I'm gonna make a guess, and since we did the X, the lambda X to X plus 1, and using the mod operator, I'm just gonna go with 246 just to.
Okay.
But I'm probably wrong.
You are wrong because this is a trick question.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And this is an example of one that can actually come up on the exam. It's absolutely a fair question, but it's a very slight trick question. Do any of my remaining jug people know why this is a trick question?
Are any of them not trick questions?
I thought the one with the if else statement wasn't exactly a trick question. It was just indentation. I mean, this was a trick question for a very subtle reason. And I'll tell you the reason is because you can't. So streams are when you apply an operation to a stream, it changes the reference type, or it changes the reference value. So here we apply map to the data. That's fine. We apply filter to it, but here we never reset the stream value. So as a comparator or comparison, if it just said for each, Mike, you would have been correct. D is the correct answer. But
because
I didn't
no
do
termination. That wasn't a proper termination in the stream. Okay.
Well, no, it's actually the stream's already been modified. So if I had said data equals data map.
Data.map. Okay.
So every time you apply an operation on a stream, it gives you a new reference.
Okay.
So if you had done data equals data.map, that also would have outputted date. But because I didn't do that purposely, what we're going to have is an exception at runtime. So it will compile fine, but at runtime, it's going to say this stream has already been closed because the original stream of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 has been closed. So that was a nice trick question. Let me go to that. Let me activate the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. Question 10, and this is the last one for today. Give yourself a pat on the back if you got it through this far. This is actually my longest question, so I apologize for that, but it's an interesting one. I believe I got this one actually from my co-author, Gene. We write a lot of the same questions because we work on the same book. So I think she actually wrote this one originally, although honestly, we've both written so many questions, it gets kind of confusing who's written what, but I'm pretty sure she authored this one originally. But I liked it, so I wanted to include it. Give everybody another minute. After a lot of time for the stream to catch up and also time for people to think about this one. So just to review, this one uses the new try with resources what is it called? You could, so they're declared, in this case, the prepared statement is declared on line 4. The result set is declared on line 6. Both are used in line 7. And I will say the syntax for line 7 is correct. So it is not B. I'll tell you that much. The syntax is correct. If you want to use them, if you want to use multiple ones, you can. You just have to separate them by a semicolon. So let's see. So waiting, give people another 30 seconds. But I will say line 7 does compile. That is the correct syntax. Now, this is an example. If you had this question before my other one on try with resource, this would have told you the syntax. So if you had seen this earlier and you saw line 7 and you knew that compiled, then you could have used that on my other question. It still was wrong, but you could have used it to help you. So since we're a little bit short on time, I will just go over what the answer is. Unless anybody in my group wants to make a comment, I'll put Mike on the spot one more time.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm concerned. Well, you're passing in ID, right, in the parameters of the read method, right? But then you're setting an int.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm a little well, I don't know if that changes it.
So this is a very subtle one, and the reason I listed it is because it actually brings up an important point that you should know if you do ever use try with resources like this. The short answer is you shouldn't use it like this. So all of this code compiles. A through C are incorrect. It all compiles. And it could work. It could work just fine. The problem is that so what happens, what I will ask you, or what I ask the group is, what happens if the prepared statement throws an exception? I'm sorry, let me start over. So let's say, sorry, what I meant to say was, sorry, I'm thinking out loud. What happens if there's an exception thrown on line 5 and 6? Let's just say this code runs, and for whatever reason, the database goes away. There's a problem because databases use JDBC uses a factory pattern, so you don't exactly know what's going on. If line 5 or 6 throw an exception of any kind, then that prepared statement created on line 4 will never be closed. So it's possible that this code runs and doesn't produce any problems. But if there's any problem with line 5 or 6, which could happen depending on your driver for any number of reasons, that prepared statement will never be closed, which is why the correct answer is actually E. It's a potential resource leak. And it's one of the reasons that if you do use try with resource like this, you have to be careful. So if you had done this inside of it, so if you'd done it something like this, I'm gonna, do it kind of quickly. But if you had done the result set inside of it, something like that, it would have been a little bit safer to do. That would have been okay. But because it was done the way it was done like this, you have the potential, sorry, it jumped out. You have the potential for a resource leak if it never gets to line 7. So just keep that in mind. You can use multiple things, but you have to be very careful when you do, because if there's any line before it, between line 4 and 7, that could throw an exception, you could have a resource leak. That concludes the interactive portion. I will finish, watch for resource leaks. I will finish this talk by giving you guys tips if you are planning to take the 819 exam. These are completely subjective. Everyone gets different questions, if you guys didn't know that. Oracle has a pool of hundreds, thousands, I don't know, of questions. So the questions you get may be different. And I'm not going to tell you what the questions are, although people will ask that. But I will tell you things that do come up from time to time. And if you are taking the exam, you should absolutely know. It may come up on multiple questions. So you shouldn't go into the exam without knowing these things. The first thing is streams. You need to know streams for the exam. Streams are used on multiple questions, whether it's concurrency, IO, NIO, you name it. Almost, I would say like half the questions, or feels, I don't know if actually half the questions have stream, but it feels like that, or lambdas. So if you don't know lambdas, if you don't know streams, you will not do well on this exam. You have to know primitive streams like int stream or double stream. You have to know filter, grouping by, and partitioning by. Those do come up. I've seen questions that have mixed all three in a single answer. So there are questions that have a chain together of map, filter, flat map, grouping by, partition by, all as a single answer, and there are 4 of them. And you have to figure out, what it's really hard to do in a short time. Those are the kind of questions I would save till the end, by the way. If you see a question with like 4 or 5 stream operations in every answer, probably save that till the end, because those will take you more time. But you have to know them well. You will not pass the exam without it. Concurrency, a lot of people think you have to know things like thread and wait notify. I mean, it can come up, but not really. Concurrency, you really have to know more about runnable, callable, execute, thread executor services. Interface signatures, so what's the signature of callable, what's the signature of runnable, which one uses generics, which one doesn't. Lock interfaces can come up. Actually, lock interface is relatively new. That was on Java 11. It wasn't on Java 8, but that could come up. So you might see locks. But you're not likely to see kind of traditional threading stuff. It's going to be much more around the concurrency API. Modules are going to be on all the exams now. And you have to know command line arguments. I don't even memorize command. I have to study the command line arguments if I'm sitting the exam because I don't remember them. But you have to know the command line arguments, JDEPs, all the related Java, JavaC, Java-C. You have to know the directives, requires, transitive, uses. Not all the questions on them are hard, but you do have to know them well. You also have to know top-down and bottom-up migration. Again, if you've never used modules, this is all new to you, but it will be on all the exams, really. So I mean, a lot of these come out of the syllabus. So I'm not really giving you things that aren't in the syllabus, but just telling you if you don't know these, you will not do well on the exam. As an example, I think I had multiple questions on command line arguments for modules. So not studying them won't just cause you one question; it'll cause you 4, 5, or 6. Exceptions, you definitely have to know checked versus unchecked. That comes up. I didn't give any questions on checked versus unchecked, but if I was going to do an 11th question, it probably would have been that. Try with resources, I already showed you. The new effectively final. Effectively final actually is separate from try with resources. Effectively final has other uses elsewhere as well. I'm not going to get into them for that, but there's a whole section on that and relating to lambdas. IO, you definitely have to know IO. Serialization comes up pretty heavily on the exams. Copy and move come up pretty commonly on the exam. One of the things that often comes up is the target of the move. So if I say copy, c.txt to the D drive, am I copying it to the D drive or in the folder the D drive or the file called D drive? So you have to understand the target and the source, whether it's a folder or a file, and you can look that stuff up when you're studying, but just be aware that matters. Annotations are new to the Java 11 exam. So you have to know a lot about how to make your own custom annotations. Most of the annotations are pretty straightforward. Like overwrite is most of the annotations, documented, target. They're pretty straightforward what they are. Probably the only hard one is the repeatable annotation because that requires creating 2 annotations. So that's the only one that you really have to study a little bit more than the others. The other ones, if you just understand what they do, a lot of them are marker annotations, which means they just get added and you don't have to do anything with them. And then I think one of the last ones is JDBC. You do have to know prepared statements. Now in Java 8, they didn't require prepared statements, which Gene and I thought was weird. We think prepared statements are more important than statements because they prevent SQL injection. So you do have to know those. You also have to know, depending on which exam you're taking, the JDBC connection strings, which is something I don't really memorize. I always look up, but there is a syntax associated with them, and they may give you invalid JDBC connection strings and ask you to pick which one's the right one. Security, you have to know best practices. You also have to know the do privilege method. And this was something that came out after. So we have a section on our blog devoted to do privilege. I will say it's not trivial. And I'd be shocked if anyone even knew what that method was because we didn't even I think we had heard of the method, but I hadn't used it at all. So if you don't know what do privileged is, it's not something you'll ever use in real programming, but it is, they added it to the 819 exam. Interfaces, as I already said, there's new interface types and new implicit modifiers. So, best to cover those as best you can. I think it's the last slide. Yeah, my last slide. Class design, constructors. If you see a constructor call, make sure it exists. Because if you could find that, like on some of the earlier ones, if you check the constructors earlier, you would immediately know the answer to the question. Invalid method overrides, sorting, comparable versus comparator. You have to memorize whether it's B minus A or A minus B. They might ask you to sort something and you have to pick, what is the proper compare to method or compare method. So you have to know that. So if you don't know what I mean by B minus A or A minus B, you haven't written a sort method lately. But that does matter for the exam. You also have to know about immutability. So for example, list of creates an immutable object. You can't sort that object. You could put it to an array and sort it or put it to something else and sort it, but you can't sort immutable objects. You can't modify immutable objects. So that does come up. It comes up outside of sorting too, but it also comes up in sorting. Lambdas, you have to know lambda syntax pretty well. And lambda syntax isn't too hard, but there are some subtleties because there's different variations on it. There's also some shorthands. You can have a lambda with a body. You can have a lambda without a body. And so let's say you have a lambda with a body, and by body I mean angle brackets. So I mean, if I look at some of my earlier, so the curly brackets. If it has a body and it also requires a return type, then you need to actually write a return statement like return 5. If it's just an expression and there is no body, then you don't have to write a return. And they might give you answers where they mix and match those, where they use a return statement with one that has no body and a return, or that's it. By no body, I mean an expression. Or they don't use a return statement and it needs a return statement. So keep in mind for that. There's also a lot of rules around shorthand for parameters. So in a lot of cases, you could type, the full variable name. You could type var x. You can't always mix and match those. So you can't, for example, use var for one variable and not var for the other. If you use var for one, I believe it has to be for all of them. So there's subtle rules that matter. You can also use final, for example. So there's not many rules though, and you use them enough on the exam that you'll get comfortable with them. And also, the last one is allowed modifiers, like as I said, final. So that concludes my talk. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on Twitter. If you have an existing Java cert, I can help you with an upgrade path. Although they kind of simplified it since they got rid of the 815 and the 816. It used to be like 4 exams. I think they have like 4 exams for 5 exams for Java 8 or 4 exams for Java 11. They've kind of simplified it down to 2 for Java 11, so it's a little easier. And I also recommend Code Ranch as a resource for asking questions. A lot of people studying for the cert post questions there about things they don't understand. And Gene and I or others on Code Ranch are happy to answer those questions. And with that, I will turn it back over to, who am I turning it back over to actually? Mike or Barry?
The real Mike, not the fake
Real
Mike.
Mike, yeah.
Okay, I think you're the real Mike.
Okay.
I think I'm turning it over to the real Mike, but if not, I apologize to the.
Yes, it says I'm the host now. So
okay,
awesome. Okay, so I don't know if we're taking any questions from the chat on YouTube, Neha. I know you've been monitoring that.
We don't have any questions on chat.
Okay. Wow. That's cool. But yeah, so well, first of all, I want to say this was very enlightening. I never had the opportunity to take the exam, and I was actually intrigued by the $25 offer that they have for the 25th anniversary of I guess that was last year of Java.
Yes, there was a 2 or 3 month period where it only cost $25 to take the cert. So if you failed, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, but just going through this and just, just those subtle things, but then, doing it like real fast, real time, it's, so I think the key takeaway there is to, just take a few seconds to just read carefully. And I think that's
and with the time limit on the 819, you don't have a few seconds. I mean,
that's true too. You said 90 minutes for 50 questions.
And some of them are very long. When I took it, I only had about 5 minutes to spare.
Okay. So you don't even have 2 minutes per question, essentially.
Get less than 2 minutes per question. Oh, the normal price of the exam, at least in the US, is $245.
Okay. But yeah, no, this was great, Scott. If I ever do pursue this, then I'll have my work cut out for me. Let me actually go back on video here. And
is it time for the
there I
raffle?
am. Okay. Yeah. So just want to wrap up here, and if there's no other questions, then I will go ahead and do that. I will share the screen. Right. And okay, so here's where we left off earlier. So let's see. Oh yeah, so just some upcoming events. I just didn't have a chance to really go through what's really coming up, at least within the next few months. I know we got Eclipse Con coming up in October. There's the JCon conference in early October, but those are a few months away. But coming up right now on July 20th, which is next week, InfoQ has been doing these InfoQ live sessions. It's just for one day, and there's only about 3 or 4 sessions. This is all obviously virtual, and this has been replacing the QCon events that are spread out throughout the year at various locations, like in New York, San Francisco, London, I think Sao Paulo, in Brazil, et cetera. So from what I understand, I think next year InfoQ will go back to in-person QCon events, but at least for a day and for a few sessions, you can get some great information, some great talks. One of the other Java editors at InfoQ gave a talk, I think in April or May. But these are nice short little sessions for you to attend. So I'll try to have some more events coming up for next month. Okay. And So upcoming meetings, we've had a debate about what to do next month. It is a slow month, and since most people are away, so we're going to try to quickly come up with an idea for next month. It'll probably be on the 17th, so that's tentative. And then in September, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have the Corcus World Tour on the 14th, and we proposed the 28th of September for the Fuji JUG tour. And so more information as we get them. We do have in October, Dan Moore will talk about the JSON Web Tokens, JWT, and what you need to know about that. And it is an interesting concept on how you read these, how you read these tokens themselves. So definitely tune in for that. All right, and so anyway, these are just some ground rules for the prize giveaway prizes. Just legalese, as it were. But we are giving away. Decided to give away 2 licenses tonight, mainly because we didn't have one last month. We didn't give away of capturing who attended because we weren't using Eventbrite. So to make up for that, we'll raffle off 2. So to that end, okay. All right. Oops. Yeah. All right. Good. Okay, we're going to execute this with args equals 2. That means 2 licenses. Okay, so we have Dmitry, let's see, Tikhomarov, if I pronounced that correctly, and then Madhusudan. If you are here, please verify by typing in the chat. Neha, if you can monitor that. You do
I'm
have to be
checking. There's a lag, so I'm waiting.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's right. Yeah.
I saw Dimitri right now.
Okay.
Let me check.
Okay. So I highlighted the 2 lines there for who the winners are. So. Nobody's confirmed yet?
Dimitri is here
Okay.
in the chat. He's chatting. Let me check. Maybe Madhusudan is not here. I don't see him on chat.
Okay, so we can redo that. So Dimitri is confirmed, so we can actually rerun this and just do 1. Does that sound? I think that's been long enough, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's run this again. Okay, and Tatiana Boris. You can confirm that you're here. Certainly appreciate it.
Mike, which email do they have to send an email to get the license?
Okay,
Is it
info at gsjug.org. I can put that in here, actually. Oh, no, people won't see it because that's a Zoom chat. Okay.
I'll post it.
Okay, yeah. All right, have we confirmed that Tatiana's here, or?
Not here right now. I don't see, but let me check. Mhm.
So while we're waiting, I just want to say I hope everybody's having a good summer. Things have loosened up with COVID, so I hope everybody gets a chance to go enjoy the summer months somewhere. Doesn't look good, huh, Neha?
Nope.
Okay.
It's a bit of lag as well. So
Okay.
I'll give another 30 seconds at least.
Okay, and then we'll run it one more time. So have everybody here. So
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I should have stated that at the very beginning, that you need to be present at the end.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have dropped off because the talk was finished. I don't think we didn't advertise it enough.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and run it again.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yep, and we have Nitin. I think you did you win one once before? I'm not sure. I'd have to check my spreadsheet. But there was a 6-month window where you couldn't win anything else. So
There might be more, Nitin. It's a very common name.
yeah, that's true. Could be, yeah. So
Yeah,
Nitin,
let's wait.
Yeah, if you can confirm that you're here, we would appreciate it.
Mike, maybe we should hold this one to next month if Nitin isn't here.
Yeah, just do the one.
Yep. Dimitri said looks like he can do a presentation too, maybe.
Oh, that would be awesome. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I should say while we're waiting, if anybody has a burning desire to present at one of our meetings, please just let us know. We always, we always try to be ahead, and it's in terms of scheduling presentations. So, but yeah, no, that would be great. Send the email to info@gsjug.org and let us know, and we can come up with a time. So
I don't see.
okay, we'll just leave it at the one, and we'll give away maybe two next
Yeah.
month, so since it is a slow month, and then we'll worry about that. So anyway, yeah, so that's good. One thing I wanted to mention too real quick is the feature set for JDK 17 is set when it went into ramp down phase 1 last month, and then ramp down phase 2 is going to start in I think Thursday, and that's where they're going to decide on which bugs to fix and things like that. So if you go to the appropriate JDK 17 page, you can see what those what some of those feature set is and what JEPs were included in there. So in any event, I'm going to stop sharing. And usually you have to actually have my last screen there, and it is that time for a pint, depending on where you are. And the fact that it's 8:11 here, it is definitely time. So thank you very much for attending tonight, and for being here with us, and for your support. We really appreciate everybody who joins our meetings. And with that, we'll end the meeting, and we'll see you guys next month. Who's on my distribution list, just check the website. You'll get all the information there. All right.